I wasn't about to argue. Mrs. Goostine made Shorty's icy mountain look like the mound next to a gopher hole. I asked her if I might keep the picture and said goodbye. Of course, I hadn't meant what I'd said about the bear. After living with her, old Morris could probably whip any size grizz without even spilling his joe. That was a dry fall that followed, and the constant threat of fire kept everyone on their toes. That ranger team never did find their bear, not a trace, and they were more mystified than they cared to admit how a grizz the size of Topeka could flat out vanish in those woods like that. That made him not just a giant and a killer, but a magic bear, too. That sort is mighty rare, even for Shorty and his pals. It was about 8 months after that terrible tragedy that I found the article I was looking for in a Northwest paper. Symphony names new conductor. There was no picture, and the name wasn't the same, but the age and description were about right, close enough. I couldn't see him settling down as a high school band leader after directing orchestras in Russia and China and all. He'd want to keep a hand in somehow. I'm not much for flying, but I got back on a plane and paid him a visit. Kept it private, but I didn't beat around the bush. He looked different, surgery can do that, and he looked like he wanted to deny it, but I was forceful. Flying gets my dander up. And he didn't waste my time trying, and for that I was grateful. Then he wanted to know how I'd figured it out. He had quite an opinion of himself, as internationally renowned people will, and must have thought he could fool about anybody. But the fact that you can lead an orchestra up and down the musical scale doesn't mean you can disappear like a magic bear. That's a different ability entirely. I told him he'd done a good job of it. The blood on his clothes was a nice touch, but it wouldn't be too hard to collect a supply of your own blood, and he could find somebody who could stuff him up a pair of jumbo simulated bare feet, too. I could have found the doctor or the taxidermist if I'd cared to, but I didn't see any reason to bother. I knew they were out there. It wasn't as if I was unsure about what had happened. And I told him I'd gone from being highly suspicious to absolutely dead solid certain after I'd met his wife. The motive, you know. That's when he broke down and started crying real tears. And he said, "Oh, please, Mr. Jessup, if there's a single bone of charity in your body, if you believe in mercy, if you believe in God, please don't send me back. I couldn't stand another day of it. Please, I'll do anything you want. I'll pay. I'm begging you. What is it you want? Free piano lessons? Whatever." I said, "Listen, Mr. Goostine, or whoever you are now, I don't want any of your money. I can already play the piano, and I have no intention of blowing the whistle on you." He wiped his nose and eyes and recovered somewhat. "You don't?" he said. "Then why are you here? What do you want?" I said, "Mr. Goostine, you can live as you please. That's your decision. I won't interfere. But you chose a national park as the setting for your little charade, and that was a mistake. You might have gotten away, but you left behind a report of a vicious bear attack, and that's bad news for the parks and bad news for the bears. I know you value your own hide, and I can't say I blame you, but the bears haven't got many hides left. They're practically wiped out as it is, and then you come along, adding fuel to the fire." "I'm sorry," he said. "Apologies are useless," I said. He said, "You sound like my wife." "I think you should donate some money to the Grizzly Bear Preservation Society," I said. "Consider it done," he said, and he wrote out a check. I caught him in a generous mood. "In addition," I said, "you failed to extinguish your fire at the campsite. The embers were still warm when the first rangers arrived on the scene." "Yes, all right, but don't you see, I couldn't douse the fire. If I had really been attacked by the bear, I would never had time to pour water on the fire. I had to leave it burning. It was a small but essential detail in the overall verisimilitude." I said, "Mr. Goostine, I don't give a hoot or holler about your overall's verisimilitude. All I know is you left a burning fire in a heavily forested area in a dry season to boot, and that's a dangerous practice. Some might call it just plain dumb. I'd cite you right now if I had the authority." "Aren't you a forest ranger?" he said. I gave him my card. "Private practice," I said. "Since you have no real jurisdiction, I take it our business is concluded," he said, and he turned and walked away. I guess he had some important music to conduct. "Don't forget the bears," I said. I could have stopped him by mentioning his wife and showed him what real jurisdiction is all about, but I let him go. I'd rather face a rabid grizz than condemn a man to that. And I had his check in my pocket. So it all worked out. He had his new life, his wife would find some fresh chump to bang around, and Shorty Parker and his crew had their magic bear. I flew back home and headed straight out to my cabin, where I could rejoin the inspirational company of the birds, the critters, and 50 acres of some of the most companionable hardwood I've ever had the pleasure to be around.